Ben Franklin. Benjamin Franklin lived from 1706 to 1790. He was born in Boston. As a teenager, he first got into print by sending letters to the newspaper that his brother published. He used the woman's pseudonym Silence Dogood, and in this persona ridiculed the way women were treated. These letters became a hit in the newspaper. He eventually admitted to his brother that he was the author, and his brother was not pleased. When smallpox started to break out across the area, he and his brother came into conflict with the Mather family, who supported inoculation. During the feud, his brother was seen as disrespectful to the clergy and was jailed. Ben ran the paper while his brother was in jail, but upon his brother's release, they didn't get along. Ben was even regularly beaten by his brother, so he ran away from his hometown at age 16 to Philadelphia. This was a bold move at the time because running away was illegal for someone his age. In his early 20s, he fathered a child out of wedlock, and then eventually settled down with his sweetheart, a different woman, and opened his own print shop. He started publishing a Philadelphia newspaper and put in letters and columns under various aliases. Franklin used the Socratic inquiry as a method of learning and argument. He considered himself a humble inquirer and doubter. In other words, he greatly trusted reason. He was, therefore, a great doubter of Puritanism. In 1733, he published Poor Richard's Almanac, at first under an alias, and it became a huge hit. It included insights about weather, recipes, but also just tons of witty sayings. This was the biggest bestseller of the colonial years. As time went by, he became more involved in civic life, invented many things, and even helped in the discovery of electricity. Why was he so important to the founding of this nation? From 1757 to 1775, he stayed in England as a representative of the colonies. As such, he saw that American interests weren't being respected and began to think about America breaking free from England. His big move in this regard was exposing the Hutchinson affair. Within this affair, the governor of Massachusetts was secretly conspiring with the English government to ignore the people's needs, but to make them feel like they were being represented. Franklin intercepted letters to this effect and exposed them. This led to his loss of position and return to America. When he came home, he became a revolutionary. His son William stayed loyal to the British, and this created a rift between them that never healed. Thomas Jefferson was the main writer of the Declaration of Independence, but much of the thoughts within it came from Franklin. Both of them were strongly against slavery, and thus much of the language of the Declaration was meant to be seen as anti-slavery without expressly using the words, because they both recognized that this would create a rift among the revolutionaries between North and South. Instead, the slavery issue was to be put off until independence was finalized. He signed the Declaration and became America's ambassador to France, where he was wildly popular due to his exploits and his personality. This was crucial in gaining France's support for the Revolution. Franklin was one of the signers of the Constitution and also spoke out strongly against slavery. He did own 2 slaves until the 1760s, when he started to believe that slavery was wrong, but then he freed them. He viewed the British as primarily responsible for bringing slavery to America. In the 1780s, he led an anti-slavery organization and continued to speak out strongly against slavery. Franklin believed that people should work to control and purge their vices, the carnal urges that they have. These included sexual urges as well as other desires that one experienced. Within some of his writings, he systematized virtues and was instrumental in spreading these ideas within his writing. He emphasized moderation, not doing anything to excess, and allowing the rational mind to be in control. He believed that time is important, one must use it. He also believed that organized religion is not rational, so be respectful about it so as to not get in trouble. But he generally didn't believe that one should subscribe to its ideas. His philosophy might be seen as somewhat cold, mechanistic, use-oriented. He believes that one who achieves these virtues will be rewarded with money and fame. In this way, Franklin is an extremely important figure in the emergence of the American capitalist ethic. This use-oriented philosophy seems to objectify others. In other words, thinking about what they can do for me. Don't damage others, but human connections are not really portrayed as that important. For example, charity is seen as too emotional and doesn't make sense in this use-oriented philosophy. Towards the end of his life, he did feel some regret for this use-oriented philosophy because he felt that it kept him from having successful, deeply felt personal relationships, and also possibly limited his openness to a more spiritually focused life. If you haven't already done so, it's important to read Remarks Concerning the Savages of North America before continuing with this lesson. Within Remarks Concerning the Savages of North America, how does Franklin expose the problem of thinking of one culture as superior to another? He exposes this through the example whereby the natives sent some young men to be educated by the Americans, but came back not knowing enough of the ways of the natives to be useful in their own society. Then when the natives offered to educate a dozen sons of Virginians, this offer was ultimately declined, in a very immediate and rather rude way. Franklin also brings up the example of the Swedish minister who tells the Indians his tale of religion, and they respond respectfully, but he is disrespectful when they share one of their religious tales. Franklin also exposes many of the practices of the settlers who sought to cheat the natives of their lands and their goods. The infamous story of the purchase of Manhattan would be a good example of this. Often their hospitality was abused. Franklin's writings occurred 100 years after those of Mary Rowlandson. His portrayal of the natives is generally kind and was part of a movement that worked towards the views of Native Americans as noble, virtuous, and in some ways wise neighbors. While this was not the predominant view in the colonies, it did become a significant one. Now, what may have contributed to the changing attitudes towards Native Americans? Well, in the 100 years since Mary Rowlandson had experienced her captivity, conflicts had died down between the groups. There also became less emphasis on trying to kill or convert the Native Americans. Religion was used as less of an instigator as the religious influence of the Puritans had waned. Also, many Native American tribes were helpful during the Revolutionary War, so some sympathy and alliances had developed.